All right, let's jump right into this explainer. I want you to meet Mark. Mark has basically had his entire life on pause for the last couple of years. He's desperate to buy a house, but like a lot of us, he's totally frustrated by the reality of a 7% mortgage. So what's he doing? He's just sitting on the sidelines, obsessing over the news, and waiting for Washington to magically slash that rate back down to 3%. It's a super common story right now, but there's a massive, glaring flaw in Mark's strategy.
And here's the really interesting part. Mark is staring at the completely wrong city. The actual threat to his housing dreams, the real reason he can't afford a home right now, well, it isn't inflation. It's not the AI bubble. And it absolutely is not whoever happens to be sitting in the Oval Office.
Section 1. The wrong city. To understand what's actually happening to your money right now, we're going to break down why financial conditions feel so incredibly tight. And we'll show you exactly why the answer to your housing woes definitely doesn't start with Jerome Powell and Washington, D.C.
See, there's this massive illusion that so many people are trapped in today. Everybody, literally everybody, is waiting on the Federal Reserve to swoop in and save the day. But the real financial shockwave, the one actually dictating the price of your mortgage, that's coming straight out of Japan.
Which brings us to part 2, Japan, the world's ATM. To truly grasp how a foreign country ended up effectively controlling the American housing market, we need to rewind the clock about 30 years and look at a massive, completely unprecedented economic experiment.
Let's walk through how this played out. Back in 1992, Japan experienced a catastrophic asset bubble burst. We are talking about a total, devastating collapse in real estate and equities. This crash was so severe it plunged the entire country into what economists now call the lost decades, basically a 30-year period of zero real growth and zero inflation. The entire Japanese economy just flatlined completely.
Faced with this total stagnation, the Bank of Japan, well, they panicked. They did what central banks do. They slashed interest rates to zero and eventually even below zero. And when that still didn't jolt the economy awake, they introduced something called yield curve control. Now, I know, it sounds like some kind of Marvel supervillain weapon, right? But practically speaking, it just meant the government was manually supergluing their interest rates to the floor. They guaranteed that Japanese government bonds would yield absolutely nothing for decades.
Part 3. The yen carry trade. Now, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a major global investor for a second. Imagine you're managing a massive Japanese pension fund or a billion-dollar bank portfolio, and your own government is offering you a 0% return on your cash at home. What are you going to do? You're definitely not just going to sit there. You're going to take your money, pack your bags, and go shopping in another country. And that is exactly what happened.
Wall Street and global investors realized there was a massive screaming loophole here. So here was the play. They'd go to Japan, borrow money in yen at near zero interest rates, convert that yen into US dollars, and then use those dollars to buy US treasuries yielding, say, 4%. Then, they just pocketed the difference. This was the infamous yen carry trade. It effectively turned Japan into the world's largest net creditor nation. Investors went on a multi-trillion-dollar shopping spree, and because borrowing this money was basically free, they didn't just stop at safe government debt. Nope, they bought tech stocks, they bought real estate, they bought literally everything.
So, the crucial takeaway here is that this wasn't just some isolated, niche financial trick. At its peak, banks estimated this trade was worth trillions of dollars. Think about that. The entire global market was essentially running on cheap Japanese Wi-Fi. But, and this is a huge but, this entire illusion relied on one very fragile, incredibly critical assumption. It assumed Japan would keep its interest rates at zero forever.
Moving to part 4, the repatriation shock. Because in 2024, that fragile assumption violently broke. The Bank of Japan looked at their own shifting economy, officially ended yield curve control, and actually raised interest rates for the first time in 17 years.
And when they raised rates a second time shortly after that, the reaction was immediate and it was brutal. The Japanese stock index, the Nikkei 225, plummeted over 12% in a single day. To put that into perspective, that was its worst single-day drop since 1987. It was a massive wake-up call, proving to the entire global financial system that the free money glitch had officially been patched.
So what does this actually mean for the rest of the world? Well, it triggers something called repatriation. Because borrowing yen suddenly became expensive, the math of that massive carry trade completely flipped upside down overnight. The money that had comfortably flowed out of Japan for 30 years, the exact same money propping up US markets, was now being rapidly forced to return home.
And here, right here, is the big secret the mainstream media really isn't telling you. We hear about the Federal Reserve nonstop, right? But the Fed doesn't actually control the long-term U.S. debt that dictates the price of your mortgage. Jerome Powell, he only controls short-term interest rates. The yields on 10, 20, and 30-year U.S. Treasuries are determined by the global bond market. More specifically, they're determined by pure supply and demand.
So let's connect the dots. For decades, Japan was a massive, price-insensitive buyer of long-term U.S. debt. If Japan, again one of our biggest historical buyers, suddenly stops buying and pulls their money back, the U.S. Treasury has a huge demand problem. To attract new buyers to fill that gap, the Treasury has to offer higher yields. And because the 10-year Treasury yield is essentially the foundation for almost every asset valuation out there, higher Treasury yields mean that 7% mortgage is here to stay. So we really have to stop waiting for Jerome Powell to save us because, honestly, you're waiting for a train that has already left the station.
Part 5. The High-Yield Defense. Let's pivot to the solution here and figure out how we can build an actionable defense while all this macroeconomic dust settles. What does our guy Mark do? Does he just throw his hands up and give up? Absolutely not. Look, we can't control the Bank of Japan, but we absolutely can control where we park our cash.
The absolute worst thing Mark can do right now is paralyze his life just waiting for a magical housing crash that isn't coming. Letting a hard-earned down payment sit rotting in a traditional checking account, earning a pathetic 0.01% while inflation eats it alive, that is a losing strategy. Your best defense right now is to actually exploit the exact same high interest rates that are keeping you out of the housing market in the first place.
Instead of fighting the current, you got to ride it. Because capital is so tight globally right now, financial institutions are fighting a literal war for your deposits. You can instantly move your cash into high-yield savings accounts yielding up around 4.1% on platforms like Raisin. Or lock it into a 6-month CD at over 4% if you know for sure you aren't buying a house anytime soon. Heck, even standard money market accounts are yielding over 3% right now.
Let's do the actual math on this, because it's pretty eye-opening. If Mark takes his $50,000 down payment out of that dead checking account and moves it into a 4.1% high-yield account, his money instantly starts working a weekend shift for him. That one simple move generates over $2,000 in purely passive income every single year, literally paying him while he sleeps.
There's this perfect quote from our source material today that completely captures the mindset shift we all need. Control your gap. Invest your gap. We have to stop letting the global news cycle freeze our personal financial progress. Just assume the 7% mortgage is the new normal. Rent a cheaper property for now. Focus on expanding the difference between what you earn and what you spend, that's your gap, and aggressively invest that gap in these guaranteed yields while you wait for the macro picture to change.
Because ultimately, building wealth isn't about perfectly timing the actions of the Bank of Japan or the Federal Reserve. It's about controlling what you can control. So the big question is this. Are you going to sit on the sidelines feeling defeated by the system, or are you going to force the system to pay you while you wait? Drop a comment below if you've officially given up on the 3% dream, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next breakdown, and I will see you in the next explainer.